Imagine you're a child in a village where a magnificent lion has been protecting the community from dangerous predators. One day, this lion discovers a treasure chest filled with gold buried on the outskirts of the village. The lion begins using this gold to strengthen the village's defences, building walls and training other animals to help guard the perimeter. But then, from across the ocean, a group of strangers arrives. They point at the lion and shout to the villagers, "That lion is stealing your gold. He's only using it to make himself stronger and more powerful. You should chase him away and let us manage your treasure instead." The villagers look at each other confused. The lion has only ever protected them. The walls he built have kept them safe. Why would these strangers, who have never lived in the village, claim to know better about their lion and their gold? This simple story mirrors a complex situation unfolding right now in Africa. The lion is Captain Ibrahim Traore, the young military leader of Burkina Faso. The gold is quite literally Burkina Faso's vast gold reserves. And the strangers pointing fingers? That would be the United States Military Command, specifically AFRICOM. In a remarkable display of Pan-African solidarity, South Africa's firebrand political leader Julius Malema has now stepped into this conflict, forcefully defending Traore against what he calls imperialist lies from the United States. But what exactly are these accusations? Why is America concerned about gold in a landlocked West African country? Who is this Captain Traore that has both Washington worried and Julius Malema rushing to his defense? And most importantly, why should you care about this escalating war of words between African leaders and American generals? Could this conflict represent something much bigger than just one country's gold? Is this the beginning of a new chapter in Africa's centuries-long struggle for true independence? And why are China and Russia's names being whispered in the background of this unfolding drama? On April 3rd, 2025, in a wood-panelled hearing room in Washington, D.C., General Michael Langley, the commander of the United States Africa Command, sat before the Senate Armed Services Committee. The general was there to deliver AFRICOM's annual posture statement, typically a routine affair where military leaders outline their strategic vision and resource needs. But then, responding to a question from Senator Roger Wicker about corruption and China's influence in Africa, General Langley made a stunning accusation that would reverberate across the Atlantic. "Absolutely, Chairman. I see this, and I don't mind calling it out," Langley declared, his voice firm and unwavering. Captain Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso. Their gold reserves are just in exchange to protect the junta regime. With these 20 words, the general had effectively accused Burkina Faso's young leader of pillaging his country's natural resources not to benefit his people, but merely to entrench his own power. This wasn't just any accusation, it was one of the most serious charges you could level against an African leader, that they were exploiting their nation's wealth for personal gain rather than national development. It's a narrative that has been deployed against African governments for decades, often to justify foreign intervention. The timing of this allegation was particularly significant. Just weeks earlier, reports had begun circulating about a potential 50 billion barrel oil discovery in Burkina Faso. A find that, if confirmed, would transform the landlocked nation into one of Africa's major petroleum producers, alongside Nigeria and Angola. Langley's testimony came as NBC reported that the Trump administration was considering merging AFRICOM with European Command as part of cost-cutting measures. Many Africa watchers interpreted Langley's forceful testimony as an attempt to demonstrate AFRICOM's continued relevance in a shifting geopolitical landscape. Whatever the general's motivations, his words set off a diplomatic firestorm. The government of Burkina Faso quickly issued a sharp rebuke, calling Langley's claims regrettable and gravely inaccurate, in an official communiqué dated April 16th. These unfounded allegations not only distort the country's reality, but also undermine the credibility of its leadership. The statement read, emphasizing Burkina Faso's commitment to fighting corruption, promoting transparency and equitably distributing national resources. But the response didn't stop there. Across the continent, African voices began rising in defense of Traore and in condemnation of what many viewed as American overreach. Among the loudest and most influential of these voices was Julius Malema, the charismatic leader of South Africa's leftist EFF party. Known for his fiery rhetoric and unapologetic Pan-Africanism, Malema was quick to frame Langley's accusations as part of a broader pattern of Western interference. Through the EFF's official channels, he launched a blistering counterattack that would elevate this diplomatic spat into a continental conversation about sovereignty, resources, and Africa's place in the global order. But to understand why Malema's intervention carries such weight, we need to understand who this Captain Ibrahim Traore is and why his control of Burkina Faso's gold has become such a flashpoint in international relations. Before he became the youngest head of state in the world, Ibrahim Traore was teaching physics and chemistry to high school students in Burkina Faso. Born in 1988 in the small town of Bondoukoui, Traore's journey from classroom to presidential palace is as unexpected as it is remarkable. After completing his education, Traore joined the Burkinabe military, eventually rising to the rank of captain. But it wasn't until September 30th, 2022, at just 34 years old, that he burst onto the international stage, leading a coup that ousted Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, who himself had seized power just 8 months earlier. Standing before the cameras in military fatigues, his eyes intense beneath his red beret, Traore explained his actions in terms that resonated deeply with many Burkinabe citizens. The previous government, he said, had failed to address the worsening security situation as jihadist groups gained ground across the country. By some estimates, extremist violence had already claimed more than 2,000 lives and displaced nearly 2 million people in a country of just 20 million. We have decided to take our responsibilities, driven by a single ideal, the restoration of security and integrity of our territory, Traore declared. What made Traore different from many who seize power through military means was his explicit invocation of Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader who was assassinated in 1987. Sankara, often called Africa's Che Guevara, had implemented radical policies aimed at self-sufficiency, refusing foreign aid and nationalising key industries before his murder. Within weeks of taking power, Traore began to echo Sankara's approach. He demanded that foreign mining companies, particularly those extracting gold, renegotiate their contracts to ensure Burkina Faso received a fair share of the profits. He redirected these newfound revenues toward building up the country's military capabilities to fight the growing insurgency. In January 2023, he ordered French troops, who had been operating in the country as part of counter-terrorism efforts, to leave within 30 days. This marked a dramatic shift in Burkina Faso's international alignments, as the country pivoted away from its former colonial ruler and traditional Western partners. Then, in September 2023, Traore joined the leaders of neighbouring Mali and Niger to form the Alliance of Sahel States, a mutual defence pact between countries that had all recently experienced military coups and turned away from Western influence. This regional solidarity further concerned Washington, which saw its influence in West Africa rapidly diminishing. By early 2024, Traore had initiated plans to rebuild Burkina Faso's mining sector under increased state control. Gold, which accounts for approximately 80% of the country's export earnings, became the centerpiece of this economic strategy. With annual production of around 70 tons, Burkina Faso is Africa's fifth largest gold producer, with reserves estimated at over 400 tons. Traore's government began requiring mining companies to sell 30% of their gold production to the state at market prices, providing the government with both physical gold reserves and substantial revenue. These policies echoed Sankara's resource nationalism from decades earlier, but were implemented in a contemporary global context where China and Russia offered alternative partnerships to Western-dominated institutions. It was these policies, redirecting gold revenues toward national defence and reducing Western influence, that formed the backdrop for General Langley's accusation that Traore was using gold just in exchange to protect the junta regime. But Traore's supporters, both within Burkina Faso and across Africa, saw something very different. A young leader determined to break cycles of dependency and exploitation that had kept his resource-rich country poor for generations. This brings us back to Julius Malema, a man who has built his political career on a similar promise to reclaim Africa's resources for the benefit of its people. If you want to understand why Julius Malema has come so forcefully to Ibrahim Traore's defence, you need to understand Malema himself, a political figure who has made economic freedom and resource sovereignty central to his political identity. Born in 1981 in Seshego, South Africa, Malema rose to prominence as the leader of the African National Congress Youth League before being expelled from the party in 2012. He subsequently founded the Economic Freedom Fighters, a leftist political party that advocates for the nationalisation of mines, banks and other strategic sectors of the economy. Malema's core message has been consistent for years. Africa's wealth belongs to Africans, and the continent will never truly be free until its people control its resources. His signature policy has been the push for economic freedom in our lifetime, which includes land expropriation without compensation, a position that has made him deeply controversial in South Africa and internationally. When General Langley accused Traore of misusing Burkina Faso's gold, Malema didn't just see an attack on one leader. He saw an attack on the very principle that has defined his political life, that Africans have the right to determine how their resources are used. The EFF's response was swift and unequivocal. In a statement posted to their official X account, the party condemned what they called Western interference in African affairs and attempts to control African resources. "We condemn the West's continued interference in African nations' affairs and their attempts to control our resources," the statement read. The EFF supports Captain Traore's efforts to reclaim Burkina Faso's gold for the benefit of its people and to resist neo-colonial pressures. The statement went on to describe Langley's accusations as part of a pattern of Western meddling designed to delegitimize leaders who reject foreign domination. It praised Traore's commitment to redirecting national gold revenues towards security and development goals, and emphasised that African countries must maintain sovereign control over their resources. What makes this intervention particularly significant is that it comes from South Africa, the continent's most industrialised economy and a member of both BRICS and the G20. Malema's party may not be in power, but as the third largest political party in South Africa, the EFF's positions influence national discourse and policy debates. By drawing a direct connection between Traore's gold policies in Burkina Faso and broader questions of African resource sovereignty, Malema elevated what might have remained a bilateral dispute into a pan-African cause. He framed Langley's accusations not as legitimate concerns about corruption, but as an attack on Africa's right to self-determination. This reframing resonates deeply across a continent where the exploitation of natural resources by foreign powers has a long and painful history. From the colonial scramble for Africa to contemporary concerns about resource colonialism by multinational corporations, the question of who benefits from Africa's vast mineral wealth remains central to the continent's political discourse. But Malema wasn't the only African voice to rise in defence of Traore. A broader coalition called the Sahel Solidarity Campaign Network also joined the fray, bringing additional perspectives and accusations that further complicated this already tense situation. If this story has stirred something in you, even just a little, then don't scroll past without doing your part. Hit that like button to show you're not one of the silent ones. Subscribe to The New Tourist if you believe these truths deserve to be heard, not buried, and don't keep this to yourself. Share this video with someone who still thinks they understand Africa, because if we stay quiet, we're no better than those African leaders, cowards and looters who steal from their countries to enrich themselves while their people starve. Now let's get back to the story. On April 20th, 2025, less than 3 weeks after General Langley's testimony, the Sahel Solidarity Campaign Network released a statement that went beyond merely defending Ibrahim Traore. It launched a counter-offensive against the United States and its military presence in Africa. This Pan-African coalition, which advocates for sovereignty and self-determination in the Sahel region, didn't mince words. Their statement labelled Langley's claims as racist, baseless, and part of a deliberate campaign to undermine the recently formed alliance of Sahel states comprising Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. General Langley's report is a hatchet job filled with grudges and ill intent, the statement declared, before asking a pointed question. Why hasn't the United States addressed historical corruption by past African leaders or worked to repatriate wealth allegedly stolen by Traore's predecessors? The network went further, linking Langley's testimony to the recent reports of a potential 50 billion barrel oil discovery in Burkina Faso. The implication was clear. American accusations were motivated not by genuine concern for the Burkinabe people, but by desire to maintain influence over the country's growing resource wealth. In one of its most explosive claims, the network alleged that US aid delivered through agencies like USAID indirectly funds terrorist groups such as Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal-Muslimin, which operates in the Sahel. While the statement provided no evidence for this extraordinary claim, it reflected deep suspicions about Western motives that pervade certain political circles across Africa. The network even drew a historical parallel to the 1987 assassination of Thomas Sankara, implying that external powers might be plotting similar intervention against Traore. This reference to Sankara, a figure whose legacy has experienced a remarkable resurgence in recent years, demonstrated how contemporary resource disputes are often viewed through the lens of historical grievances and unresolved traumas. The Sahel Solidarity Campaign Network concluded its statement with a call for General Langley's dismissal and urged African nations to unite against what it called imperialist agendas. It quoted Traore himself, "I serve the Burkinabe people with integrity, which is more precious than any material wealth." These responses from Malema's EFF and the Sahel Solidarity Campaign Network reflected a growing tendency among African political movements to reject Western criticism of governance issues, recasting such concerns as neo-colonial interference. This approach has gained traction, partly because Western powers have often applied double standards in their relationships with African governments, overlooking corruption and human rights abuses when geopolitically convenient. But this continental defense of Traore also needs to be understood in the context of global power competition. As the United States, China, and Russia vie for influence in Africa, accusations and counter-accusations about resource exploitation have become weapons in a much larger strategic battle. If you've been wondering why the United States military is so concerned about gold mining in a landlocked West African country, the answer lies in the changing nature of global power politics. Africa isn't just a place rich in resources, it's increasingly a battleground in the competition between global powers. To understand this dynamic, we need to take a step back and look at what was happening in Washington just before General Langley made his accusations against Traore. In March 2025, NBC reported that the Trump administration was considering merging AFRICOM with European Command as part of cost-cutting measures, potentially diminishing America's military focus on the continent. This news came against the backdrop of China's expanding economic presence in Africa and Russia's growing security partnerships across the Sahel region. AFRICOM, created in 2007 during the Bush administration, has struggled to define its purpose and demonstrate its value, particularly as American strategic priorities shift toward the Indo-Pacific region and competition with China. By highlighting threats like corruption, terrorism, and foreign influence in his testimony, General Langley was making the case for AFRICOM's continued relevance. But there's a deeper geopolitical context to consider. Since 2017, Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger, all former French colonies in the Sahel, have experienced military coups that brought to power leaders skeptical of Western influence. All three countries have expelled French forces and sought new security partners, including Russia's Wagner Group. This regional shift away from Western alignment coincides with China's growing economic footprint in Africa. Through its Belt and Road Initiative, China has become the continent's largest trading partner and a major investor in infrastructure projects. Unlike Western aid, which often comes with conditions related to governance and human rights, Chinese investment typically comes with fewer political strings attached. In his testimony, General Langley explicitly linked these dynamics, stating that the Chinese Communist Party is seeking to use the continent as a platform to expand its global dominance, while Russia exploits instability and chaos to extend its reach. The specific focus on Burkina Faso's gold reflects both its economic importance and its symbolic value. Gold is one of Africa's most valuable export commodities, and Burkina Faso's reserves are substantial. By controlling how this gold is sold and where the revenues flow, Traore's government can reduce its dependence on Western financial institutions and aid. Gold has historical and cultural significance as a symbol of wealth and power. When African leaders assert control over gold resources, they're not just making economic policy, they're making a statement about sovereignty and self-determination that resonates deeply with their populations. Julius Malema understands this symbolism perfectly. His EFF party has long advocated for the nationalisation of South Africa's mines, including its gold mines, which were central to the country's development under apartheid but primarily benefited the white minority. By defending Traore's gold policies, Malema is advancing his own political narrative about resource nationalism and economic justice. But this isn't just about symbolism or politics. It's about real money and real power. Burkina Faso produces approximately 70 tons of gold annually, worth billions of dollars. If directed toward national priorities rather than flowing to foreign companies and shareholders, these revenues could significantly impact the country's development trajectory. The alleged oil discovery further raises the stakes. If confirmed, 50 billion barrels would make Burkina Faso one of Africa's petroleum giants overnight, transforming its geopolitical importance and providing Traore with financial resources that could fund both development and defence without Western support. This prospect alarmed Washington not primarily because of concerns about corruption, but because it could accelerate Africa's strategic drift away from Western influence, a process already underway across much of the continent. When Julius Malema and the EFF defended Ibrahim Traore, they weren't simply rejecting General Langley's specific claim about gold revenues. They were offering an alternative framework for understanding Africa's relationship with natural resources and foreign powers, one that challenges dominant Western narratives about corruption, governance, and development. In the Western narrative, often amplified by international institutions like the World Bank and IMF, Africa's development challenges stem primarily from internal factors: corruption, poor governance, insufficient market liberalisation, and inadequate integration into global economic structures. Malema and like-minded African leaders propose a fundamentally different explanation: that Africa remains poor despite its vast resources because those resources continue to be extracted under unfair terms established during colonialism and maintained through neo-colonial economic relationships. When the EFF statement emphasised that African countries must maintain the sovereign right to determine how their resources are utilised without external interference, it was articulating this counter-narrative. The problem in this view isn't that African leaders control resources, it's that they haven't controlled them enough. This perspective has deep historical roots in Pan-African thought. From Kwame Nkrumah's concept of neo-colonialism to Walter Rodney's analysis of how Europe underdeveloped Africa, influential African thinkers have long argued that the continent's wealth continues to be drained through unfair trade terms, exploitative investment arrangements, and financial structures that perpetuate dependency. Thomas Sankara, whose legacy Traore explicitly invokes, embodied this tradition during his brief tenure as Burkina Faso's president from 1983 to 1987. Sankara rejected foreign aid, nationalised land and mineral resources, and pursued policies aimed at self-sufficiency. His assassination, widely believed to have been supported by former colonial power France, has become a powerful symbol of external opposition to African economic independence. By defending Traore against accusations of misusing gold revenues, Malema is connecting contemporary resource policies to this longer intellectual and political tradition. He's suggesting that what Western powers label as corruption or mismanagement is often actually an attempt to reclaim economic sovereignty, to ensure that Africa's resources benefit Africans first. This reframing has particular resonance in South Africa, where the legacy of apartheid continues to shape economic structures. Despite political liberation in 1994, the country's mineral wealth remains largely controlled by corporations with historical ties to the apartheid system, while the black majority continues to face high levels of poverty and unemployment. Malema's EFF has made economic freedom its central demand precisely because political freedom hasn't translated into material improvement for many South Africans. When he defends Traore's gold policies, he's implicitly arguing that control of natural resources is essential for meaningful independence. This perspective helps explain why accusations of corruption from Western officials often fail to resonate with African audiences, or even backfire. When General Langley claimed that Traore was using gold to protect the junta regime, many Africans heard echoes of past Western interventions justified by similar claims, interventions that typically resulted in governments more amenable to foreign economic interests. The Sahel Solidarity Campaign Network made this historical pattern explicit in their statement, asking why the US hasn't addressed corruption by past African leaders who maintained close ties to Western governments and corporations. This pointed question highlights the selectivity that often characterises Western anti-corruption rhetoric. By recasting the debate in these terms, Malema and his allies are not just defending one leader against specific accusations. They're challenging the very framework through which the West evaluates African governance, suggesting that the primary question shouldn't be whether resources are used according to Western standards of transparency and accountability, but whether they're used to advance African interests and reduce external dependency. This counter-narrative has gained strength as new global partners, particularly China, offer alternative development models and investment approaches that emphasize infrastructure development and industrialization without political conditionality. While these alternatives come with their own potential pitfalls, they've expanded the range of options available to African governments seeking development paths outside Western-dominated institutions. For Malema, defending Traore isn't just about solidarity with a fellow African leader. It's about advancing a vision of African development centered on resource sovereignty, reduced external dependency, and rejection of Western economic orthodoxy. It's a vision that resonates deeply with many Africans frustrated by decades of unfulfilled development promises. As the dust settles on this war of words between General Langley, Captain Traore, and Julius Malema, we're left with important questions about the future of African resource sovereignty and its implications for global power dynamics. The conflict over Burkina Faso's gold is not an isolated incident. Across Africa, governments are reassessing their relationships with foreign investors and seeking greater control over natural resources. From Tanzania's reforms of mining contracts to Nigeria's efforts to increase local content in oil production, resource nationalism is on the rise. This trend is likely to accelerate as Africa's position in global supply chains becomes increasingly crucial. The continent holds approximately 30% of the world's mineral reserves, including 40% of gold, 60% of cobalt, and 90% of platinum group metals. As the world transitions to renewable energy and digital technologies, minerals like cobalt, lithium, and rare earth elements, all abundant in Africa, will become even more strategically important. For leaders like Traore and advocates like Malema, this changing global context presents both opportunities and challenges. On one hand, growing demand for African resources strengthens their bargaining position vis-à-vis foreign partners. On the other hand, it increases the likelihood of external interference as global powers compete for access. What we're witnessing is not just a diplomatic spat, but a chapter in Africa's ongoing struggle to transform political independence into meaningful economic sovereignty. The outcome of this struggle will shape not only Africa's development trajectory, but also the future of global resource politics in an increasingly multipolar world. This isn't just a story about Malema and Traore, it's about all of us, about remembering who we are, protecting African unity and solidarity, and rebuilding what was broken during the scramble for Africa. And if you felt anything watching this, pride, curiosity, maybe even a little fire in your chest, then don't let that feeling disappear. Subscribe to The New Tourist right now, because this isn't the last story like this we're telling, not by a long shot. Like this video so the algorithms don't bury a story the world needs to hear. Share it with your family, your friends, and your group chats. Be the reason someone else learns the truth. And if you want to go even deeper, if you want behind-the-scenes stories, early access, exclusive discussions, join our membership community. Because this isn't just a channel anymore, it's a movement. And the story we're writing together, it's only just beginning.